Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Gulf Today on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines coming out of the region this hour. Heavy rain has flooded tents in southern Gaza, with civil defense saying displaced families are now trapped in rising water. The UN's Francesca Albanese says Palestinians are being left to freeze and starve as the storm deepens the humanitarian crisis. Iceland has pulled out of Eurovision 2026, joining several countries in a boycott protesting Israel's participation. Its broadcaster says Israel's inclusion has created disunity and believes no peace or joy would come from taking part. Israeli Druze leader says the United States must guarantee the safety of Syria's minorities after July's bloody clashes in Sawida displaced tens of thousands. He says strong US support would boost stability, limit Israeli intervention and help advance a federal model to protect community rights. President Trump says the lineup of world leaders for the Gaza Board of Peace should be announced early next year. He says many leaders are seeking a seat on the body created under his plan that established a fragile Israel-Hamas ceasefire. Amnesty International says Hamas and other Palestinian groups committed crimes against humanity during and after the October 7th attack in southern Israel. The report says the group also continued violations through its treatment of hostages and withholding of bodies. Israel has approved 764 new housing units in 3 West Bank settlements, a move the Palestinian Authority says undermines regional peace efforts. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich says over 51,000 units have been cleared since 2022, rejecting any future Palestinian state. Trump administration officials have held advanced talks on possibly imposing terrorism-related sanctions on UNRWA, sources say, sparking serious legal and humanitarian warnings inside the State Department. The UN agency provides lifeline services to millions of Palestinians amid the ongoing conflicts. The US says the Houthis are unlawfully holding current and former local employees of its Yemen embassy. Waz Hingston says the detentions show the Houthis use terror and intimidation to maintain control. Those are the top stories this hour. A top Hamas leader has told the media that the group is open to a weapons freeze, but rejects the demands for disarmament put forward in the US-sponsored peace plan for Gaza. The leader has added that Hamas is open to the deployment of the international peacekeeping force along Gaza's borders with Israel, but will not agree to operating inside the Palestinian territory. The US-sponsored ceasefire deal, in effect since October, halted the war that began after Hamas's deadly attack on Israel on October the 7th. But it remains fragile as Israel and Hamas accuse each other of almost daily breaches. The agreement is composed of 3 phases. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently indicated that it was about to enter the second phase. Under that phase, Israeli troops would further withdraw from their positions in Gaza and be replaced by an international stabilization force, while Hamas would lay down its weapons. Joining us now is Peter Baum. He's the editor of the Weekly Blitz. He joins us live from London. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Hamas is now proposing a weapons freeze but not total disarmament. Do you see this as a genuine shift or a tactical pause from the group?
I think it's more of a tactical pause, but it does have some credibility. Let me explain why. The story was first broke about 4 days ago in a British paper, The Independent, and the template for the weapons freeze was based on the input that British negotiators had with the Turks and Qataris, and the template was the IRA, Irish Republican Army militants, and the British government, who came to an agreement, a similar agreement, which to this day holds good, that the IRA would store their weapons, still have control of them, and put them in storage for a prolonged period of time. That negotiation has held good, and that was the template, I understand, for the Hamas statement. However, as I said, that story broke 4 days ago. Then 2 days after, 48 hours ago, a number of organisations, offline podcasters, and some quite well-respected journals were publishing the same story, leveraging up on it. And this time, what was different was that the fact that 4 days ago there was no, although Hamas said there would be a weapons freeze, they didn't provide a time frame, but 48 hours ago everyone was suggesting it was a 10-year time frame. So I do believe that although the Hamas spokesman remains anonymous, we don't know who that is, I do believe that they have probably put forward this. Now, there has been absolutely no response from what I have seen from any official Israeli government source. Quite a few things in Israeli newspapers, but nothing as yet from an Israeli government source,
Yes.
which paradoxically indicates to me that something perhaps is going on here.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, sorry, Thomas.
Sorry, that's all right. But Peter, if Hamas keeps its political structure but freezes its weapons, does that satisfy Israel's security demands?
Probably not. Probably not. But I think Israel is at a point now where the Trump administration is getting so fed up with both parties, i.e. the Israelis and Hamas, that I think there has to be a degree of flexibility, and Trump can put the pressure on Israel to go some way in saying, look, you won't get it all, but this is as good as you're going to get, and go for it. So I think the mere fact that there's been no official response from the Israeli government as yet does indicate to me that something is seriously being considered. There was one thing that it may sound contrarian to this view, in that the nominal leader of Hamas, Khaled Mashal, gave an interview with Al Jazeera yesterday, and nothing was mentioned in that interview about the weapons freeze or the 10-year time period, although he was talking in general terms about the ceasefire and peace going forward, etc. But that, on that particular issue, on those details of the weapons freeze and the 10-year time period, nothing came forward from Al Jazeera, which again could indicate that something is seriously being considered here, the fact that both parties are not showing their hand as yet.
Okay, Peter, do stay with us as we have further news updates coming from West Asia. President Donald Trump announced that a decision on the leaders to serve on the Gaza Board of Peace will be made early next year. The board was created under a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, and Trump says world leaders, including kings, presidents and prime ministers, are eager to join. He described the board as one of the most legendary ever. The United Nations recently approved the creation of the board, which will help coordinate Gaza's redevelopment. The board will operate until the Palestinian Authority can take control of Gaza after completing reforms. Let's take a listen in to what the US President had to say.
Well, we'll do it early next year. And the Board of Peace it'll be one of the most legendary boards ever. Everybody wants to be on it. It's mostly going to be, I guess, we weren't thinking about it that way, but they want to all do it. Basically, it'll be the heads of the most important countries. They all want to be on. It wasn't really planned. We thought we were going to get very distinguished people that do that kind of thing for a living. But really, it looks like it's turning out to be they want to be on. The heads, the kings and the presidents, prime ministers, they all want to be on the board.
Peter Baum joins us once again. Peter, do you think Palestinians or regional governments trust US-led structures after decades of failed peace initiatives in the Middle East?
Probably not, Thomas, but nevertheless, I don't think that will be a bar to this peace board actually being created and being set in place in 2026. Now, what we have heard, common knowledge through the global media, is that the former Prime Minister of the UK, Tony Blair, was supposed to be a high-profile member of this board, but has been rejected by a number of Arab countries because of the role he played with the Iran-Iraq war, etc. But one name that I've heard may be on the board as someone that's not discussed very often was a former member of the Blair cabinet, former minister, David Miliband, who now heads up a very high-profile charity connected to the United Nations, and his is a name that has come forward, an ally of Blair. Obviously, still they maintain close relationships, so that's a name that I wouldn't surprise me if he was on the list too.
It's all very interesting, and we will, of course, bring our viewers that as soon as it comes out. Thank you very much for joining us, Peter. It's always a pleasure to have you. We now move on, and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar at the State Department in Washington to discuss regional security and humanitarian issues. Saar emphasized to Rubio that any attempts to weaken Hamas's obligation to disarm are unacceptable. He called the current moment a turning point in South America after Israel restored diplomatic ties with Bolivia. The leaders also focused on the ongoing situation in Gaza, including the implementation of the president's 20-point plan, as well as developments in Syria and Lebanon. Both Rubio and Saar reaffirmed their commitment to working closely together to promote peace and stability across the Middle East. According to officials, the discussions highlighted the importance of maintaining strong US-Israel cooperation, ensuring accountability for armed groups, and supporting humanitarian efforts for civilians affected by conflict. Saar stressed that security and diplomacy must go hand in hand to achieve lasting solutions in the region. Okay, we move on once again. An Israeli finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has announced that Israel has given final approval for nearly 800 new housing units in 3 settlements in the occupied West Bank. The units will be built in Hashmonaim, Givat Ziv and Beitar Illit. Smotrich said that more than 51,000 units have been approved in the West Bank since he took office in 2022. He called the latest approval part of a strategic process to strengthen settlements and ensure security and growth. The Palestinian leadership condemned the move, saying all settlements violate international law. Meanwhile, UN reports indicate that Israeli settler attacks against Palestinians have surged, with October recording the highest monthly total since 2006. Gedaliah Blum joins us. He is a Middle East affairs expert. He joins us live from Eli in Israel. Thank you very much for joining us, Gedaliah. Israel has approved these 800 new housing units in 3 West Bank settlements. Does this help Israel's strategic position, or does it further isolate it internationally?
Well, first of all, I would just like to review the way that you are addressing the locations as occupied West Bank I call it Judea and Samaria. Judea and Samaria is the historical name, the biblical name of the land. And when you call it Judea, what you're saying is that you see that the word Jew is in Judea. So it's very hard to say that Jews are occupying Judea. It's much easier to erase that name and to use the word West Bank to detach the connection. It's kind of like saying that, you know, Indians aren't from India. Instead, let's change the country's name India and say Indians aren't from Palestine, whatever you want to call it. So that really sets the groundwork on the conversation, because if we're talking about that Jews are actually indigenous to this land, then you would say that they have an inalienable right. They're a protected class under international law. The UN has its own agencies to protect and to recognize.
I do apologise. I'm simply referring it as the name that the United Nations refers it to, and of course it is occupied under international law. The United Nations recognises it as that.
International law. There's no judge. There's no consensus. This becomes more of a policy according to public opinion with officials. But at the end of the day, international law it absolutely has no jurisdiction. There's no judge, there's no jury, there's no constitution. And this is something that the UN, who is made up of primarily peer countries, are making determinations on what free countries can or cannot do. The UN is very discriminatory when it comes to the Jewish people, when they have an agency for indigenous peoples that they recognize, and they have a certain number of checkboxes. According to many international indigenous experts who work with these recognized peoples, they are telling me that Jewish people check more boxes than any other indigenous people that have been recognized. Yet the UN doesn't recognize these Jews as being indigenous for political reasons. So when you're talking about Jews building in Judea, that for me is very discriminatory. And I'll tell you what, if the mayor of Paris all of a sudden came out and said we don't want any Jews living in certain areas, that Jews can't live there.
3 million Palestinians live in the West Bank. Of course,
that's not true. That's a false number. That's maybe according to the Palestinian Authority numbers, who haven't done a consensus in 20 years and are using numbers and are adding people many times over. They're duplicating them.
Israeli settlements are considered illegal under international law of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Of course.
No, that's absolutely not. No, that's absolutely not true. If you look at the Geneva Convention, it says that a foreign army cannot occupy a land unless they were attacked and it became a defensive war. Israel has every right after 1967 to come into Judea and Samaria and to make sure that no other attacks are made along the state of Israel and the Jewish people.
Okay.
And now it just happens to be that within the 67 lines is where 80% of the Bible took place. So if there's any Christians or Jews or anybody living out there who believed in the Bible, that they should understand that when you call it the West Bank, you're ripping out the pages of your Bible. You're detaching the core reason of why that the Jewish people were able to bring out these Judean Christian values. This is exactly what the international community is doing when they're calling it the West Bank. They're ripping out the pages of their own Bible and they're ignoring history.
I just want to give our viewers some context here. Talking in regards to international law and in the political reality of the West Bank right now, Israel controls the borders, the airspace, and most movement in the West Bank. Around 60% of the territory is under full Israeli control. I want to get the live talk about Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, of course, bragged about the amount of settlements that have been built during his tenure since 2022. What do you think of the work he's doing in the West Bank? Of course, internationally sanctioned minister. Your thoughts on his actions and, of course, approving these new settlements as his tenure has moved on?
Well, I mean, again, I want to reiterate: when you call it the West Bank, you're not only redefining what the land is called, but you're also detaching me as a Jew from this land, and I find it extremely insulting. And I understand that you believe that it's to be this is the political terms that we're using, but there's a truth. There is a truth, and politics and people's perceptions throughout history have been proven wrong, and the Jewish people will prove the world wrong that it is of the interest not only of Israel but also of the Arabs and the world that the Jews do in fact build and are strengthened. Because wait, I just want to make
I asked you about the finance minister and you haven't answered me. Please.
Yeah, so the finance minister is very happy to expand the borders of freedom and democracy in civil liberties and continue to contract the borders of a fierce society under the Palestinian Authority that hasn't had an election in nearly 20 years. Okay, we have elections every number of years. Okay, now the question is, what's going to happen with the Arabs under the Palestinian Authority as Israel does continue to build and expand these borders of freedom?
Okay.
And I think that's a discussion we need to have. And if anybody actually wants to have a Palestinian state, what they're actually saying is that they are looking to expand the borders of tyranny and shrink the borders of freedom and democracy in the Middle East. And I think that's something that people really need to recognize. Where do you really stand? And I think Bezalel Smotrich is a fighter for freedom and democracy and human rights for the Jewish people. That Jewish people should be able to, under international law, according to the standards that you mentioned, that Jews could actually live and build in Judea without discrimination, just like we could live anywhere in the world.
I do apologize. I have to interrupt you. Do stay with us, however. I just got to reiterate to our viewers, the state of Palestine is recognized by 140 plus countries at the General Assembly, and their territory is claimed as the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. Okay. Gedaliah, do stay with us as we have a further discussion next. We now move on. And the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon reported that Israeli forces fired on its peacekeepers in southern Lebanon. The incident occurred during a routine patrol along the Blue Line, the de facto border between Israel and Lebanon. UNIFIL said Israeli soldiers in a Merkava tank fired multiple bursts of machine gun fire near the peacekeepers' convoy, although no one was injured. This marks the latest in a series of incidents involving Israeli forces and UN peacekeepers, with tensions still high despite a year-old truce between Israel and Hezbollah. UNIFIL has called on Israel to cease aggressive actions, emphasizing that attacks on peacekeepers violate UN Security Council resolutions. Gedaliah Blum joins us once again. Gedaliah, UN peacekeepers now say Israeli forces fired on them in southern Lebanon. How concerned should Israel be about this report?
Well, actually, the report is from UNIFIL is that there were warning shots that were fired upon them. And by calling it from a tank, a lot of the perception would think that it actually like a tank shell came out. But like you reported, it was machine gun fire. That was a warning shot. Now, I think it's very clear at this point right now that UNIFIL should not even be there. Now, they were put in southern Lebanon under Resolution 1701, which had three mandates. Number one was stop hostilities between Israel and Lebanon on the Lebanese border. Number two is to keep armed groups like Hezbollah away from the southern border. And at this point, and there was also number three, which was they were supposed to stop Hezbollah from, I believe, from rebuilding and coordinate with the Lebanese army. They haven't, since 2006, they haven't fulfilled any of those three mandates. Now, the question is, why exactly are they there? Are they being used as human shields by Hezbollah? And I would say that's probably the most likely case. And so when it comes to right now, the situation in southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah is regrouping, they're bringing in more weapons from Iran with Iranian money through Syria, through al-Jolani's people into southern Lebanon. And now you have a UN body who is quote unquote peacekeepers. That's what they're saying. That's what they call themselves. There hasn't been any peace being kept. There hasn't been any mandates that they have been given fulfilled. And I believe that they're not a target, but we are in the midst of.
Does that warrant warning shots being fired at them? Does that warrant these multiple bursts of machine gun fire? UNIFIL.
Yeah, that's what a warning. Yeah, that's what a warning shot is. That's what a warning shot is. A warning shot is not just one shot. You have to have multiple shots of warning. So this way they realize that it is a very deliberate. It's a very deliberate firing of the weapon, and not just a one-off. Yeah,
get a live
their lives were not in danger. Their lives are not in danger.
Get a live bloom. I'm so sorry, we've run out of time. I do apologise there, but thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you very much for taking the time. We now move on, and the United States has condemned the ongoing detention of former and current US embassy staff in Yemen by the Houthi movement. US State Department spokesperson Tommy Pigott called the arrests unlawful and criticised the sham proceedings against those detained. He also accused the Houthis of using terror to maintain their grip on power. This comes as tensions remain high in Yemen, where the Houthis continue to control large parts of the country. The United States is calling for the immediate release of those detained. We move on once again, and Storm Byron is bringing heavy rains and severe flooding to the war-ridden Gaza, compounding the suffering of displaced families. Palestinian civil defense reports that those forcibly displaced by Israel's ongoing conflict are now trapped in flooded tents in southern Gaza. UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese has condemned the dire conditions, saying Palestinians are left to freeze and starve amid the relentless violence. As the storm continues, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza deepens, and with no end in sight to the devastating ongoing humanitarian situation. And that's a wrap on Gulf today. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.